The scent of scorched earth and shattered dreams clung to Liam McGregor long after the fire trucks had gone. It was a phantom smell, a ghost that haunted his waking hours and stalked his sleep. Just 2 days prior, that same air had been thick with the sweet perfume of 10,000 blossoms. Roses from Ecuador, orchids from Thailand, tulips from Holland, so deeply purple they looked like velvet. They had been his masterpiece, the culmination of a career spent coaxing beauty from soil and stem. They were for the founder's gala, a contract that was supposed to save his small shop, petal and stem, and secure a future for his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. Now all that remained was a blackened husk on a quiet city street. The sign, with its elegant, hand-painted script, was a melted ruin. The bay window where he'd displayed his proudest arrangements was a jagged mouth of broken glass. He stood across the street, the morning chill seeping into his bones, and watched a single, determined firefighter aim a final stream of water at a wisp of smoke curling from the wreckage. It was like trying to drown a memory. Chloe squeezed his hand, her small fingers a fragile anchor in his swirling sea of despair. "Is our shop all gone, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and raspy. Her asthma always got worse with stress and smoke. Liam knelt, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in his face. "We'll build a new one, Sweet Pea. Even bigger and better." He was lying. The insurance would never cover arson, and he was financially ruined. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew who did this. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. The Van Houten brothers, Preston and Alistair. Their corporate floral empire, Elysian Blooms, had been trying to swallow his little shop for a year, part of their campaign to monopolize the entire district. They saw flowers not as living art, but as units of profit. They saw him not as a competitor, but as a stubborn weed to be eradicated. He had refused their insulting offers, and then he had outbid them for the gala contract. It was an act of defiance they could not tolerate. His phone buzzed with a text from the gala organizers. It was curt, professional, and utterly devastating. They were invoking the failure to deliver clause. He was being sued. Not only had he lost his business, but he was now plunging into a debt so deep he wasn't sure he'd ever see daylight again. He looked down at Chloe, at her wide, trusting eyes, and felt a cold dread that was worse than any fire. He had failed her. A few blocks away, in a corner booth of a quiet, old-fashioned diner called the Silver Spoon, Damien Sterling watched the rain begin to fall. He was a man who moved through the world like a shadow, his presence immense but rarely noticed. His suit was worth more than the car Liam drove, but he wore it without an ounce of flash. His face was a study in impassive control, his dark eyes missing nothing. He came to this diner every morning for the solitude and the strong black coffee. He often saw the florist and his little girl here. He didn't know their names, but he knew their routine. The father, with calloused hands and a gentle smile, would help the girl with her homework. The girl, with a bright laugh that cut through the diner's low hum, would draw pictures of flowers on her napkins. There was a warmth between them, a self-contained world of love that Damien observed with a distant, hollow ache. It reminded him of a door he had closed long ago, a family he had lost to his own pride. The waitress, Sarah, refilled his cup. She was a young woman with kind eyes who always treated the florist and his daughter like royalty. Today, Damien noticed Sarah watching the door, a worried frown on her face. The florist and his little girl were late. Damien took a slow sip of his coffee, the news report on the small television above the counter playing unheard in the background, a low murmur about a fire at a local business downtown. He paid it no mind. It was just noise, another tragedy in a city full of them. He had his own ghosts to contend with. He finished his coffee, left a 50 on the table for a $3 bill, and walked out into the rain, utterly oblivious to the fact that his world and Liam McGregor's were about to violently collide. The next 48 hours were a blur of smoke-stained paperwork and soul-crushing phone calls. Liam met with a fire inspector who spoke in clipped bureaucratic tones about accelerants and points of origin. He met with an insurance adjuster who offered sympathy but no solutions, pointing to the fine print in his policy that nullified his claim in the case of a malicious act. The phrase felt like a sanitized insult. This wasn't a malicious act. It was the execution of his livelihood. He sat with Detective Miller, a tired man with a coffee-stained tie and a deep-seated cynicism. Miller listened patiently, nodding as Liam laid out his suspicions about the Van Houten brothers. "I get it, Mr. McGregor," Miller said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "They had motive, they had opportunity. But guys like Preston and Alistair Van Houten, they don't get their hands dirty. They have lawyers and alibis lined up before they even think of breaking the law. We found what was left of your security camera. The hard drive was melted to a lump of plastic. Without a witness or a confession, my hands are tied." Defeated, Liam left the precinct and walked. He walked for hours, the city's indifferent crowds parting around him. Every florist shop he passed felt like a punch to the gut. The vibrant colors, the lush greenery, it was all a reminder of what he had lost. His grandfather had started Petal and Stem after the war, a small bucket stand that grew into a neighborhood institution. His father had nurtured it. Liam had inherited not just a shop, but a legacy. A legacy he had allowed to be turned to ash. His final stop was the bank. The manager, a man who had approved Liam's business loan with a hearty handshake just 2 years ago, now couldn't meet his eye. He spoke of obligations, of default clauses. The bank was seizing his business assets, which amounted to a pile of charred rubble and an empty bank account. They would likely come for his small house next. That evening, he sat with Chloe at their small kitchen table, pushing macaroni and cheese around his plate. He hadn't eaten a real meal in days. Chloe was quiet, picking at her food. "Will we have to move away, Daddy?" she whispered, her fork clinking against the ceramic. The question struck him with the force of a physical blow. This house was the only home Chloe had ever known. It was where her mother, Eleanor, had painted the mural of sunflowers on her bedroom wall. It was where they had measured Chloe's height in pencil marks on the doorframe. "No, sweet pea," he said, his voice thick. "I won't let that happen." But it was another lie. He had no idea how he would stop it. He was out of options, out of fight. He felt hollowed out, a walking shell of a man. The next morning, with only a few dollars left in his pocket, he took Chloe to the Silver Spoon. It was a small comfort, a familiar place in a world that had become terrifyingly alien. He ordered a coffee for himself and pancakes for Chloe, mentally calculating if he could afford the tip. They sat in their usual booth. Chloe, sensing his despair, didn't draw on her napkin. She just sat close to him, occasionally leaning her head against his arm. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears. Sarah, the waitress, came over with the bill. She placed it face down on the table and then looked at Liam, her expression full of a sorrow that was so genuine it almost broke him. "I saw the news, Liam," she said softly. "I am so sorry." She slid the bill back off the table. "This one's on the house. All of them are, for as long as you need." Liam opened his mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. He could only nod, a lump forming in his throat. This small act of kindness from a woman who was probably struggling to make her own ends meet was both a comfort and a profound shame. He didn't notice the man in the corner booth. Damien Sterling had watched the entire painful exchange. He had overheard Liam on the phone earlier, his voice cracking as he spoke to the bank. He had heard Chloe ask her father if they were going to be poor now. And he had heard Sarah mention the name of the flower shop, Petal and Stem. The name meant nothing to him. But then, as he was leaving, he overheard Sarah talking to another waitress by the kitchen. "I just feel so bad for him," Sarah said. "Those Elysian Blooms monsters finally did it. They finally drove him out of business, burning his shop to the ground. It's just evil." Elysian Blooms. The name stopped Damien cold. He knew that name. His firm had recently handled a hostile logistics takeover for them. He knew the owners, Preston and Alistair Van Houten. He knew them to be ruthless, arrogant, and utterly devoid of ethics. A cold, precise anger began to coalesce in his chest. He looked back at Liam and Chloe. The father's shoulders were slumped in defeat. The little girl's face was pale with worry. He saw in them a reflection of his own failure, his own loss. The sister he had pushed away for marrying a man he deemed beneath her. A man who worked with his hands. A florist. He remembered her name, Elena. He pulled out his phone and made a call. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the chilling weight of absolute authority. "Marcus," he said, speaking to his head of security, "I have a job for you. A flower shop was burned down 2 nights ago. Petal and stem. The owners of Elysian Blooms are responsible. I want proof. I don't want speculation. I want irrefutable evidence. Use any means necessary. I want to know who lit the match. And when you find them, I want you to find out everything about them. Their homes, their finances, their families, everything they value. I want a complete picture." He paused, his gaze fixed on the small, broken family in the booth across the diner. "And Marcus," he added, his voice dropping to a deadly flatline, "do it quietly. The police are not to be involved. This is a private matter." He hung up the phone. The rain was streaking down the diner window, blurring the world outside. But for Damien Sterling, everything had just come into terrifyingly sharp focus. This wasn't about a stranger anymore. This was about family, and he would protect his family. Marcus Thorne was a man built of quiet efficiency and barely concealed menace. A former Special Forces operative, he was now the head of global security for Sterling Industries, a position that required him to be part ghost, part pitbull. When Damien Sterling said, "Handle it," Marcus translated that into a symphony of untraceable digital intrusion, discreet surveillance, and conversations held in quiet rooms where people suddenly became very eager to tell the truth. His first stop was not the police department, but the city's digital archives. Within an hour, he had the full report on the fire at Petal and Stem. He noted the inspector's suspicion of a high-temperature accelerant and the convenient destruction of the security system. It was amateurishly professional, designed to look like a simple act of vandalism while being brutally effective. Next, his cyber forensics team went to work. The police had declared the security system's hard drive a loss. Marcus's team saw it as a challenge. They worked in a sterile, windowless lab that was leagues beyond anything the city could afford. They painstakingly separated the melted layers of plastic and metal, using proprietary recovery techniques to access the damaged platters within. It was like performing surgery on a ghost. While they worked, Marcus dispatched a field team. 2 unassuming agents, a man and a woman who could blend into any crowd, began a subtle canvass of the area around the burned-out shop. They didn't flash badges, they made small talk in coffee shops, chatted with delivery drivers, and spoke to the homeless man who slept in the nearby alley. They weren't asking about the fire, they were asking about unusual vehicles, about people who didn't belong, about anything out of the ordinary in the days leading up to the incident. The first break came from the homeless man, a grizzled veteran named George, in exchange for a hot meal and a $100 bill. "Saw a fancy black car," George rasped, "a real quiet one. Parked down the block the night of the fire. 2 fellas in expensive suits got out. Never seen 'em before. They looked nervous, like they were afraid to scuff their shiny shoes." The second break was more significant. A disgruntled former employee of Elysian Blooms, a warehouse manager fired for speaking out about unsafe working conditions, was located through a deep dive into online forums. After Marcus's agent assured him of complete anonymity and offered a substantial consulting fee, the man began to talk. He spoke of the Van Houten brothers' obsessive rage over losing the gala contract. He'd heard them in Preston's office, shouting about teaching the dirt digger florist a lesson he'll never forget. The final damning piece of evidence came from the scorched hard drive. After 72 hours of meticulous work, the forensics team recovered a few corrupted, fragmented video files from the moments before the camera was destroyed. The footage was warped by heat, the colors distorted, but it was unmistakable. 2 figures, their faces momentarily clear in the harsh glare of a flashlight. Preston and Alistair Van Houten. One was holding a red gasoline can, the other was holding a lighter. Marcus compiled everything into a single encrypted file: high-resolution stills from the video, the informant's sworn and notarized statement, cell tower data that placed the brothers' phones in the vicinity of the shop at the time of the fire, and financial records showing a large, untraceable cash withdrawal 2 days prior. He even cross-referenced the unique chemical signature of the accelerant with a specialty fuel supplier located near the Van Houten estate. It was an open and shut case. It was enough to send the brothers to prison for a decade. He uploaded the file and went to Damien Sterling's penthouse, a stark, minimalist expanse of glass and steel overlooking the city. Damien was standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the room, looking down at the grid of lights below. "It's done," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The file is on your server. It's conclusive. They did it themselves. No proxies." Damien didn't turn around. "Walk me through it." Marcus detailed the evidence, his voice a flat, unemotional monotone. He concluded, with this, the district attorney would have them convicted before lunch. There was a long silence, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Damien finally turned. His face was like stone, but his eyes held a chilling, incandescent fury. "The law," Damien said, his voice dangerously soft, "is for settling disputes. This was not a dispute. This was an execution. They tried to execute my family's future. A prison sentence is a temporary inconvenience for men like them. They'll have their lawyers appeal it down to a few years in a minimum security facility. They'll come out arrogant and unrepentant. No, the law is insufficient." He walked over to a large digital display concealed within a wall of black marble. He touched the screen, and a satellite image of a sprawling, opulent estate appeared. "The Van Houten ancestral home," Damien stated, "built by their great-grandfather. It houses their art collection, their family records, their history. It is the source of their pride, the symbol of their legacy. It is everything to them." He looked at Marcus. "They burned down a small shop that represented one man's entire world, his entire legacy. It seems only fitting that we respond in kind. An eye for an eye." Marcus's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about retribution. "What's the plan?" "They are hosting a party there this Saturday," Damien said, zooming in on the mansion's layout. "A victory party to celebrate their acquisition of the next 5 years of the gala contract. It will be full of the city's elite. I want the house empty of guests and staff. I want the brothers to be the only ones there to witness it. And I want it to be a force of nature. Not a simple fire. I want it erased." He turned back to the window, his gaze distant. "My sister Eleanor. She loved flowers. She married a man who created beauty with his hands. I thought it was beneath her. Beneath us. I told her she was throwing her life away." His voice was laced with a self-loathing so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. "I haven't spoken to her husband, Liam, since her funeral. I've just watched from a distance. Watched him raise my niece with a love and dedication I've never known. I was too much of a coward to bridge the gap my own arrogance created." He faced Marcus again, the cold fury returning to his eyes. "The Van Houtens didn't just burn down a building. They attacked the last living piece of my sister. They threatened her daughter, my niece. For that, there is no forgiveness. There is only payment." He gestured to the screen. "Marcus, I'm not asking you to light a fire. I'm asking you to deliver a message written in flames. I want the Van Houten name to be a cautionary tale whispered for generations. I want them to have nothing left but the ashes of their arrogance." Marcus gave a single sharp nod. "Consider it done." The ghost and the pitbull had his orders. The symphony was about to begin. The week leading up to the Van Houten party was a masterclass in silent, invisible warfare. Marcus Thorne's teams moved with the precision of a scalpel, dissecting and neutralizing the estate's defenses without leaving a single fingerprint. The mansion's security was state-of-the-art, a multi-layered system of thermal sensors, pressure plates, and laser grids, all monitored by a private security firm. Marcus's cyber team didn't hack the system, they seduced it. They introduced a subtle malware worm into the security firm's network via a phishing email to a low-level technician. The worm's only job was to create a diagnostic loop at a specific time on Saturday night, feeding the monitors 15 minutes of perfectly normal pre-recorded footage while the real world went dark. Meanwhile, another team focused on the physical. Posing as county surveyors, they mapped the estate's underground utilities. A second pair, disguised as high-end caterers, did a walkthrough of the mansion, their specially designed shoes mapping the interior layout and identifying structural weaknesses with ultrasonic pulses. The plan was not simple arson. Damien had demanded something more elemental. Marcus procured several small thermite-based incendiary devices. Once ignited, thermite burns at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel. It cannot be extinguished with water. It simply burns until its fuel is spent. Placed strategically, these devices wouldn't just burn the mansion, they would gut it from the inside out. While this intricate web was being woven, Liam McGregor was living in a quiet hell. He spent his days navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of bankruptcy and his nights staring at the ceiling. He sold his delivery van for a fraction of its worth just to buy groceries. One afternoon, he was at the diner when Sarah approached his booth. "Liam," she said, "there's a man here who'd like to speak with you. He says it's about a job." Liam looked up to see a man in a sharp suit. "Mr. McGregor," the man said, "my name is John Allen. I represent a private consortium of horticulture enthusiasts. We were admirers of your work. We heard about your tragedy and would like to help." He slid a business card and a thick envelope across the table. "We are prepared to offer you a position as a lead consultant. This envelope contains an advance retainer." Liam stared at the envelope. I don't understand. Who are you people?" "We prefer to remain anonymous," Allen said smoothly. "We believe talent like yours should be nurtured, not extinguished." With a polite nod, the man left. Liam's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. He looked at Chloe and felt tears of overwhelming, incomprehensible relief begin to fall. Saturday night arrived. The Van Houten estate was a galaxy of light and sound. Preston and Alistair moved among the city's elite, preening and accepting congratulations. Miles away, in a darkened command vehicle, Damien Sterling watched a dozen drone feeds. Marcus stood beside him. "All teams are in position," Marcus reported. "The security loop is active. They are blind." "The guests?" Damien asked. "The catering staff will announce a surprise fireworks display at the far end of the lake," Marcus said. "It will draw everyone away. The local fire department has just received an anonymous tip about a major gas leak on the other side of the county. Their response time will be delayed." "Proceed," Damien ordered. On the ground, Marcus's team moved like wraiths, placing the thermite devices at pre-selected structural points. The operation took less than 4 minutes. As the first firework exploded over the lake, a servant approached the Van Houten brothers. "Sirs, your great-aunt is on the phone, an urgent family matter. She's waiting in the study." Annoyed, the brothers walked back inside the now empty mansion. In the command vehicle, Damien watched their thermal signatures enter the study. "Everyone is clear," Marcus confirmed. Damien's face was illuminated by the cold glow of the monitors. He thought of Liam's face, etched with despair. He thought of Chloe's small hand. He thought of Elena. "Ignite," he said, his voice as cold and final as a closing crypt. There was no grand explosion. It began with soft hisses, then an otherworldly glow from the windows. In the study, the lights flickered and died. A strange heat filled the room, and the smell of melting metal reached them. A roar began to build, like a blast furnace. They ran to the hallway and stopped, paralyzed. It was a wall of incandescent white fire. Panic seized them. They scrambled for the main entrance, bursting out onto the front steps, just as the roof collapsed inward with a deafening crash. The party guests by the lake turned at the sound. It was no longer a house. It was a volcano, a man-made sun, burning with a terrifying, unnatural intensity. Preston fell to his knees, a raw animal scream tearing from his throat. Alistair stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, as the great central spire of their ancestral home buckled and plunged into the inferno. From his vantage point, Damien Sterling watched without emotion as the Van Houten mansion was unwritten from existence. He felt only a cold sense of balance being restored. He turned away from the monitors. The message had been delivered. In the days that followed, the story of the Van Houten fire dominated the city. Arson was ruled out. No accelerant could explain the sheer, steel-melting intensity. The Van Houtens were ruined, not just financially, but socially. They were pathetic figures who had lost everything. Liam McGregor, consumed by his own bewildering fortune, was called a week later by the mysterious Mr. Allen. Mr. McGregor, the voice said, my employers feel that simple consultancy is not enough. They have decided to invest in you directly. Go to your lawyer's office this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Liam walked into his lawyer's office in a daze. Mr. Harrison, an elderly man, looked as stunned as Liam felt. Liam, I've been a lawyer for 40 years and I have never seen anything like this. An anonymous benefactor has solved all your problems. He slid documents across the desk. The deed to his old lot, purchased from the bank. The deed to the larger vacant building next to it. A cashier's check with enough zeros to build the most spectacular flower shop the city had ever seen. And finally, an irrevocable trust fund for Chloe, covering all medical and educational expenses for life. Liam stared, his mind blank. Who? He finally managed to whisper. Who would do this? Mr. Harrison pushed a small white envelope across the desk. This was all that came with the final wire transfer. With trembling fingers, Liam opened it. Inside was a single piece of heavy cardstock. On it, in elegant typed script, were 4 simple words. For Elena's family. The world tilted. Eleanor, his late wife, her estranged family, her powerful older brother, whose name he barely remembered. Damien. He looked up, tears streaming down his face, a wild, dawning comprehension in his eyes. It wasn't a miracle. It was family. And as he connected the timing of his salvation with the news of the Van Houten's biblical ruin, a cold knot of awe and terror formed in his stomach. This wasn't just charity. This was a statement. The next few months were a blur of creation, with the full, unseen weight of Sterling Industries clearing every permit and expediting every delivery. The new petal and stem rose from the ashes. It was a masterpiece of glass and living green walls, a temple to botany. But gratitude was a heavy cloak, and Liam found it suffocating. He was no longer a victim, but he felt like a pawn in a game played with fire and money. The gardener in him was grateful, but a colder, harder part of him, born in the ashes of his shop, knew that accepting this gift without claiming his own power would make him a dependent for life. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when he received an invitation. The founders' gala, postponed after the unfortunate incident, was back on, and the floral contract awarded by a new committee was his. In the same envelope was a news clipping. The Van Houten brothers, desperate to salvage their name, were scheduled to give the keynote address, a speech on resilience in the face of tragedy. The arrogance was breathtaking. It was a slap in the face. Liam didn't smile. A cold, quiet resolve settled in his chest, displacing the fear and despair that had lived there for months. Damien had given him the tools for a new life. The Van Houtens had just given him a reason to use them. He didn't call Mr. Allen. He didn't need permission. He made a different call to a number he had acquired through a discreet inquiry. 2 days later, he sat in a private tea room with Beatrice Vance, the city's most feared and respected society columnist. She was a woman of 60, with eyes that could dissect a lie from across a crowded room. Mr. McGregor, she began, her voice like dry silk, your message was intriguing. You said you had a story for me, the story of the gala. She studied him, her gaze analytical. I expected a broken man seeking pity. You do not look broken. Liam met her stare without flinching. He placed a single perfect foxglove blossom on the table between them. I have more than a story, Miss Vance. I have a script. And you have the starring role. Her eyebrow arched, a bold opening. Do you know who I am? I know you are the only person in this city who despises the Van Houtens more than I do, Liam said calmly. And I know why. I know about Arthur Gable. The composure on Beatrice's face cracked for a fraction of a second, a hairline fracture in a marble statue. Her eyes narrowed. You've done your homework. Arthur Gable taught my father everything he knew about hybridizing roses, Liam said, his voice soft but edged with steel. The Van Houtens didn't just bulldoze his nursery. They tried to erase his name from the city's history, just like they tried to erase mine. Beatrice was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled before her lips. Go on, she finally said. For the next hour, he laid it all out. He explained the ancient art of floriography, the language of flowers. He described the arrangements he was planning for the gala, each one a silent, damning accusation. He wasn't asking her to just report on it. He was inviting her to be the weapon. When he finished, she picked up the foxglove. "Insincerity," she murmured, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "The Van Houtens have been a cancer on this city's culture for years. All commerce, no art. And you're offering me the scalpel, on a silver platter, in front of everyone who matters." She met his gaze. "You understand this is not a game, Mr. McGregor. There is no going back from this. You will make enemies of very powerful, very foolish people." "The man who has nothing to lose is the most dangerous man in the room," Liam replied. "I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid of them. Are you?" Her smile widened. "My dear boy, I have been waiting 2 decades for an artist with a spine of steel to emerge. You have your translator." The night of the gala was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. The ballroom was a glittering jewel box of the city's elite. But an undercurrent of tension ran beneath the polite chatter. The flowers were the source. Liam's arrangements were everywhere, magnificent and unsettling. Guests would lean in to admire a beautiful spray of monkshood, only to pull back, a shiver running down their spine without knowing why. Towering stalks of foxglove brushed against shoulders, clusters of dark basil scented the air with malice, and thorny branches of flowering quince warned of temptation. The beauty was sharp, a weapon disguised as decoration. The Van Houten brothers took the stage. Their suits were new, but hung on them like shrouds. Their confidence was a hollow, desperate pantomime. Preston droned on about their family's legacy, about rising from the ashes, about rebuilding. Liam stood near the back, perfectly calm, and caught Beatrice Vance's eye. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The trap was set. As Preston finished a scattered, polite applause, Beatrice stood, a spotlight finding her as if by magic. A microphone was discreetly passed to her. "An inspiring story, Mr. Van Houten," she said, her voice dripping with acid-laced honey. "But I must ask about the artistic choices for the evening. As a student of history, I find the floriography fascinating." Preston blinked, confused. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. "The what?" "The language of flowers," Beatrice explained, her voice carrying through the now silent ballroom. She gestured to a nearby arrangement. "Foxglove, for instance, a classic symbol for insincerity. And tansy," she pointed to another, "is a declaration of war. And all this basil, it means hatred. It's a rather aggressive theme for a charity gala, wouldn't you say?" A horrified murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised, recording. Beatrice wasn't finished. She walked slowly toward the stage, a predator closing in. "You speak of rising from the ashes, yet you are surrounded by rue, for regret, and wormwood, for bitter sorrow. I even see rhododendron over there, which, as we all know, simply means beware. It's almost as if the artist who designed this evening is telling a different story. A story of deceit, arrogance, and deserved ruin." Alistair's face went white as a sheet, his knuckles bone white where he gripped the lectern. Preston's flushed a blotchy, furious red. "This is an outrage. It's just decoration. We had nothing to do with this," he stammered, his voice cracking. Beatrice reached the stage and pointed to the single, magnificent centerpiece on the lectern they had been standing behind. It was a simple, elegant cascade of pure white lilies. "And lilies," she said, her voice softening but losing none of its edge. "They mean purity, rebirth, majesty. A stark contrast to everything else here. It seems the only thing in this room tonight with any integrity is the memory of whatever you tried to destroy." The humiliation was absolute. It was a public execution delivered not by fire, but by flowers. The Van Houtens stumbled off the stage to a deafening final silence, their social lives incinerated more completely than their mansion had been. As they pushed through the doors, a former business partner deliberately turned his back on them. Not a single person met their gaze. They were ghosts. Liam watched them go, his hands steady, his heart calm. He had turned their own weapon, the art of flowers, against them. He felt a presence beside him. It was Damien Sterling, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking not at the stage, but at Liam. The air between them crackled with unspoken history. "My methods are fire and ruin," Damien said, his voice a low murmur. "Yours are more elegant. You didn't just create a message, you hired a translator." Liam met his gaze. He saw the power, the ruthlessness, but also the flicker of a man searching for a connection he had thrown away years ago. "Fire burns indiscriminately," Liam replied, his voice quiet but firm. "It consumes everything. A flower can be planted in a specific heart. You gave me the stage. I just wrote the final act." Damien nodded slowly. A hint of a smile, the first Liam had ever seen, touched his lips. "Elena would have been proud. Of the flowers. Of you." He looked toward the front of the hall where Chloe was with her sitter, her eyes wide with the spectacle. "Of us." He extended a hand. It wasn't the gesture of a benefactor to a recipient. It was a gesture between equals, between partners, a king of industry and a king of blossoms. Liam took it, the grip firm and sure. The calloused hand of a man who worked the earth met the smooth, manicured hand of a man who moved markets. "Hello, Damien," Liam said, his voice steady and clear. "Welcome to the family." The handshake sealed more than a truce. It forged an alliance. Damien's gaze followed the disgraced brothers as they fled into the night, swallowed by the glare of paparazzi flashbulbs. "That was surgical," Damien admitted, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. "I would have simply buried them. You put them in a glass coffin for the entire world to see." "They used a sledgehammer," Liam said, his eyes never leaving Damien's. "I used a scalpel. It's about choosing the right tool for the job. You can't fight weeds with a flamethrower. You have to pull them out by the root." A small, satisfied smile touched Liam's lips. "Besides, you provided the theatre, the spotlight, the microphone for Beatrice. That was Marcus, wasn't it? I saw him by the sound booth." Damien's impassive mask flickered with surprise, then settled into deep respect. "You don't miss much. I merely ensured your artist had a proper canvas. I didn't know what she was going to paint." "You didn't need to," Liam said. "You just needed to trust the artist." As the gala wound down, the city's elite buzzed with the scandal. It was more than gossip. It was a seismic shift in the social landscape. The Van Houten name, once a symbol of legacy, was now a punchline. Before the night was over, 3 of their major corporate partners had invoked moral turpitude clauses in their contracts. The phones of their lawyers and bankers began to ring, and the calls were not friendly. A few weeks later, in a cramped, water-stained apartment that smelled of stale takeout and desperation, Preston and Alistair Van Houten existed as ghosts of their former selves. The television was on, a business report detailing the final hostile dissolution of Elysian Blooms, its most valuable assets, the international supply chains, the prime real estate, being absorbed by a newly formed anonymous subsidiary of Sterling Industries. "He knew," Alistair whispered, his voice thin and reedy. He paced the threadbare carpet, his hands trembling so violently he had to clasp them together. "That florist, that nobody. He knew what every single flower meant. He didn't just beat us, he wrote our obituary and made us read it aloud in front of everyone we ever knew." His breath hitched into a dry sob. "They looked at us like we were insects." "It was Sterling," Preston snapped, his voice a ragged bark. He hadn't shaved in days, and a wild, paranoid glint shone in his bloodshot eyes. He lunged at the television, pointing a shaking finger at the Sterling Industries logo. The money, the new shop, the gala? The florist was just his puppet. Sterling was pulling the strings all along. This was never about flowers, it was about our contracts. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from their flimsy door. It was too firm for a neighbor, too official for a delivery. Alistair opened it to find 2 men in dark suits. They didn't introduce themselves. One of them held out a small, exquisite black box tied with a simple black ribbon. There was no note, no card. "What is this?" Alistair stammered. The man simply placed the box in his hands and turned, the 2 of them walking away down the dingy hall without a word. With fumbling fingers, Alistair untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single withered sprig of basil. Hatred. A final silent punctuation mark, and beside it, something else, a small tarnished silver locket. Preston peered over his shoulder. "What is it?" Alistair opened the locket. On one side was a faded photograph of a young, smiling woman. On the other, a tiny, expertly pressed flower, a delphinium, the symbol for haughtiness and arrogance. "I don't understand," Preston grumbled, but Alistair did. He remembered the story. The old nurseryman, Arthur Gable, the one their father had ruined decades ago to acquire the land for their first major distribution center. Gable had a daughter, a fiery young reporter who had tried to fight them in the papers. Her name, Beatrice Vance. The box fell from Alistair's nerveless fingers. It wasn't a puppet's message. It wasn't just Sterling's corporate conquest. This was deeper, older. This was the artist signing his work, and the translator adding her own postscript. They were not just beaten. They were understood. They had been dissected, judged, and condemned by ghosts they had created long ago. The realization was infinitely worse than any financial ruin. High above the city, in the rooftop greenhouse of the new Petal and Stem, the air was warm and sweet, with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Chloe was carefully watering a small, vibrant blue orchid, explaining its specific needs for light and humidity to a silent, attentive Damien. He knelt beside her, his $1,000 suit in stark contrast to the rich soil, listening with an intensity he usually reserved for hostile takeover negotiations. "She has your sister's touch," Damien said quietly to Liam, watching his niece with an expression of unguarded wonder. "Elena could make anything grow." "She has her mother's heart," Liam corrected gently. "The touch she gets from me." The silence that followed was comfortable, familial. Damien finally stood, brushing a stray speck of dirt from his knee. "Elysian Blooms is gone," he stated, turning his gaze from Chloe to the sprawling city below. "The name is poison. I've broken up the assets, their entire global distribution network, the refrigerated fleet, the import licenses, the contracts with growers in 12 countries. It's all held in a new company. It's yours. A gift." Liam shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "I appreciate the gesture, Damien. Truly. But I don't want an empire built on their model. They sold flowers like they sold widgets, by the unit, without soul. They moved product. I cultivate life. That's not me. I'm a gardener, not a king." He paused, looking at the city lights beginning to twinkle. "But those growers, the ones in Ecuador, in Thailand, they were forced into exclusive contracts, paid poorly for their art. I wouldn't mind having a conversation with them. As partners, not owners." Damien looked at Chloe, her face alight with pure joy as she misted the orchid's delicate leaves. He looked at the thriving, beautiful world Liam had built not once, but twice. He finally truly understood the difference between the brutal force of power and the quiet resilience of strength. "Fair enough," he conceded, a genuine smile reaching his eyes. "We'll set up a cooperative. Sterling Industries will handle the logistics. Petal and Stem will handle the art, a new model." "A better one," Liam agreed. Damien nodded. "But know this, Liam, no one will ever threaten what you grow again. Not while I'm here." Liam accepted the vow for what it was, the ultimate insurance policy, paid for in fire and regret. He walked over to his daughter and her uncle, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. The setting sun cast their 3 silhouettes against the glass, a strange and powerful new family, forged in loss and bound by a fierce, unspoken loyalty. A legacy of ash, reborn into a future of infinite bloom.